Breaking news now. The thawing of U.S.-Russian relations is like ice cracking on a frozen lake. An unannounced visit by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Kiev, and a meeting between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Indian counterpart S. Jaishankar in Jakarta on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit. Any serious student of Russian politics knows that the real action in the Russian-American tango takes place in the background, away from the amphitheater where the gladiators do battle. As a result, two lines of inquiry into the Ukraine crisis need to be pursued. An unannounced visit by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Kiev, and a meeting between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Indian counterpart S. Jaishankar in Jakarta on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit. Wednesday was the day for both occurrences. Jakarta, Kiev, Moscow, and Washington would have all had a lot of cipher traffic in the past 48 hours. Lavrov and Jaishankar exchanged views on the most pressing issues of bilateral relations and international issues, according to the Russian summary of their meeting. It was emphasized that all parties involved wanted to work together more closely in multilateral settings like the United Nations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Group of 20, and the BRICS. The meeting was obviously necessary due to India's frantic efforts to craft a formulation on Ukraine for the G20 declaration that would allow the Modi government to claim diplomatic victory. In a statement released last week, Lavrov said, "There will be no general G20 declaration on behalf of all members if our position is not reflected." However, Jaishankar would be aware that "never say never" is a cardinal rule of Russian diplomacy. It's looking increasingly likely that Modi will leave the G20 with a trophy in his hand, rather than Moscow. If Modi is successful, he will be a more reliable ally for President Biden in the Indo-Pacific. The White House stated, while in New Delhi, President Biden will also commend Prime Minister Modi's leadership of the G20 and reaffirm the U.S. commitment to the G20 as the premier forum of economic cooperation, including by hosting it in 2026. It's still possible that Ukraine compromises can be negotiated. If this is the case, its parameters will show whether or not Moscow and Washington are willing to compromise on their divergent interests and goals. On September 6, Blinken began a highly unusual trip to Kiev. His stomach clearly contained no fire. He refrained from making any threats toward Russia or making fun of Putin while on Ukrainian soil. Blinken, too, did not seem overly enamored with Kiev's counteroffensive. Instead, he stressed the human toll of the war, Ukraine's post-conflict return to democracy, and the country's economic reconstruction. Blinken repeatedly emphasized that he was following Biden's orders when making the trip. Blinken made the following proclamation in President Zelensky's presence. "We in the United States are committed to keeping pace with you. And President Biden asked me to come to not only reaffirm our support but also make sure that our and other countries' efforts are being maximized for both the short-term challenge of the counteroffensive and the longer-term challenge of helping Ukraine build a force for the future that can deter and defend against any future aggression, and to work with you and support you as you engage in the crucial work of strengthening your democracy and rebuilding your country." Inspiring words, but no braggadocio about freeing Crimea, pushing the fight into Russian territory, or forcing Russia to abandon its annexations in order to negotiate with it. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba of Ukraine claimed at a joint press conference with Blinken that he and Blinken had a substantive discussion about delivering ATACMS long-range rockets to Kiev. But Blinken avoided the issue altogether. The fact that Blinken's visit lasted into a second day was the most peculiar part of it. Blinken's overnight stay in Ukraine must be his first. While Blinken's first day was jam-packed with meetings with Kuleba, Zelensky, and Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, his second day, September 7, was more free-form. His trip to Kiev was obviously for serious talks. Given the failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive to achieve its politico-military objectives and the worrying signs of waning support in the United States and Europe for the proxy war, Biden may be interested in initiating peace talks between Moscow and Kiev. In the 3 months since Kiev's counteroffensive began, Casualty estimates range from 65,000 to 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers according to research conducted in both Russia and the West. Coincidentally, on September 6, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine confirmed Rustem Umerov to succeed Alexei Reznikov as the country's defense minister. Umerov, a Crimean Tatar who was born in Uzbekistan, USSR, has never served in the military. However, Zelensky has faith in him, and he is considered suitable by the Americans.